Have you ever felt the weight of being a source of shame for someone you love? It's a pain that can't be explained, only felt. I never thought this would happen to me. All my life, I believed a mother's love was enough to protect, to unite, to heal. But that day, I discovered that even the purest love can become invisible. It all began simply, as the deepest pain often does, in silence. It was an ordinary morning. The sun streamed through the kitchen window. The smell of coffee wafted through the house, and I did what I'd always done for years: prepare my daughter's breakfast. A mother's routine is made up of small gestures, the ones no one notices but that carry all the love in the world. I set the table, arranged the flowers, and laid out the bread just the way she liked it. When she came down the stairs, she was beautiful, as always. Her hair was perfectly styled, her clothes impeccable, her perfume expensive. I felt proud, the same pride I'd felt since she was born. But that day, something different happened. When she looked at me, something in that gaze pierced me. It wasn't anger. It wasn't indifference. It was shame. Shame doesn't shout, doesn't push, doesn't curse. It just settles in, silent, and makes the heart shrink. In that instant, I felt the ground disappear. I stood there, still, with the still warm cup of coffee in my hands, trying to understand what was happening. She looked away, pretended to be in a hurry, and left, not a word, just the sound of the door closing and the sound of my own silence. I tried not to overthink it, tried to convince myself it was all in my head, but a mother's heart knows. It senses before the world knows, and my heart already knew. Something had changed between us. For years, I was proud of her every achievement, every step, every victory, every smile. I worked hard so she could have everything I didn't. I gave up my dreams so she could live hers. And now, suddenly, it all seemed too small to fit into the world she lived in. My simplicity, my worn clothes, my way of speaking, my work, everything seemed to be a source of embarrassment. She, who once looked at me with love, now looked at me as if carrying a burden. I remember taking a deep breath and moving on with my day. I washed the dishes, swept the floor, and tidied the house as always. But inside, there was a knot that wouldn't untie, a strange feeling, as if love had lost its way. And the worst part was, I couldn't blame anyone. I only felt an emptiness, a heavy silence that spread through the house, and within it, the sensation of slowly fading away. There are pains that don't need words. They settle in gestures, in absences, in looks. And that's exactly how I realized I was losing my daughter. Not because she wanted to hurt me, but because the outside world began to teach us that loving our roots is for those who have been left behind. I was the image of her origins, the reminder of what she was trying to forget. And this is one of a mother's cruelest pains, seeing her own love treated as something outdated. I tried to fool myself, pretend it didn't hurt, pretend it was a phase. But the truth is, that day, as the coffee cooled on the table and the sun streamed through the curtains, I felt something inside me break, not loudly, but silently, almost invisibly. It was as if the woman I was began to slowly disappear, leaving in its place only the shadow of a mother trying to understand where she lost her daughter's love. I didn't know it yet, but that look would be the starting point of a long journey, a journey of pain, silence, faith, and later, forgiveness. But before I got there, I had to face the wound. And every wound begins like this, with a small, almost banal moment, but one that changes everything. That look in her eyes was the beginning of my awakening, a bitter but necessary awakening. I just didn't know yet how much it would affect me, transform. I've always believed that a woman's strength comes not from what she has, but from what she endures in silence. Before all this happened, before that look that tore me apart, I was just a woman trying to survive and raise the daughter God gave me with dignity. And if there's one thing I've always had, it's courage. The courage to wake up early, to face the day, to keep going even when no one believed I could. I did it all alone. I worked from dawn to dusk so she could have what I never had. While the world slept, I was already up, packing lunches, cleaning the house, selling whatever I could find. And even tired, I smiled, because a mother's smile is the shield that protects her child from the harshness of the world. Life has never given me anything easy, From an early age, I learned that being a woman, poor, and a mother was a triple challenge. But I also learned that there is no greater honor than fighting for what you love. When I found out I was pregnant, her father disappeared as if he had never existed. I could have given up. I could have rebelled, but I decided that that child would be my reason to keep going. While many people told me, "You won't make it," I simply thought, "You'll still see me succeed, even with calloused hands." It was years of sacrifice. I worked as a housekeeper, a cook, and a caregiver for the elderly. I washed other people's floors with tears in my eyes, but I never let the house go without food. I slept little. I cried in secret, but I never stopped thanking God for another day of strength. And do you know what sustained me? Her smile. With every step she took, I saw a piece of my effort blossoming. When she started school, I remember spending hours watching her through the gate. I thought, one day, my daughter will be proud of me. And that hope was what kept me going. We think a mother's love is enough. That love alone is enough. But life is cruel when we believe that. I always wanted to be the kind of mother she could admire. And in my mind, teaching her values, faith, and honesty would be the greatest gift. I taught her to respect others, to be grateful, to never forget where she came from. But the world out there teaches the opposite. Out there, people learn that humility is synonymous with weakness. And that's when, without realizing it, her shine began to fade from the light I had within. I was never a perfect woman. I had my mistakes, my flaws, my hurtful words spoken at the wrong time. But everything I did for love. I worked in houses where they treated me as if I were invisible, but I thought of her constantly. Every dish washed, every piece of clothing ironed, every time I bowed my head to hear humiliations, I told myself, one day she'll understand. But time passed, and what I dreamed would be a source of pride became a reason for silence. I remember when she was still little and said she wanted to be a doctor. I saved coins in a tin whenever I had spare change. I thought the sound of the coins was the sound of her future being built. I believed that all it took was love and hard work to make things work out. Maybe that was my naivete, believing that love was enough to protect me from the world. How many times have I walked miles to get to work because the bus fare wasn't enough? How many times have I arrived home with bleeding feet, but with a full heart, knowing she was sleeping peacefully? What I wanted most was for her to be proud of me. And deep down, I think every mother listening to me right now knows exactly what I'm saying. If you've also gone above and beyond to raise a child, comment below. I understand this pain. Because only those who have been through this know what it's like to love to the limit, expecting nothing in return, and still feel invisible. I don't remember ever taking a vacation. I don't remember ever having a complete day off. Life taught me that rest is a luxury, and love is an obligation. But even tired, I never complained, because the love for a child is the kind of love that nourishes even when everything else is missing. I watched her grow. I saw every phase, every dream, every achievement, and I was there. Even when I wasn't remembered, I was the backdrop to her story, the foundation, the root, and for a time, that was enough. The problem was that as she grew older, the world grew around her too, and I began to notice small changes. The clothes she wanted to wear no longer seemed to suit me. The places she frequented no longer included me. Her friends talked about things I never had, trips I'd never taken, foods I couldn't even pronounce, and I smiled, pretending to understand, pretending to belong. But inside, I felt the chasm widening, and it's at this point in the story that many people judge me. They say, "But why didn't you assert yourself? Why didn't you show who you were?" And I answer, because sometimes love is silence. Because there are times when the best thing a mother can do is let her child move on, even if it hurts. I thought time would solve everything, that love would return, that she would remember who I was. But the truth is, time only increases what we don't face, and I kept putting it off, keeping quiet, trying to convince myself that her pride in me would return with time. You know what's hardest? It's looking in the mirror and realizing that the woman you've become is the result of battles no one saw. I'm not bitter, I'm grateful. But gratitude doesn't erase the scars. And every wrinkle on my face is a reminder of the nights I traded sleep for work, tears for faith, and exhaustion for hope. I believed that, in the end, all of this would be rewarded with a simple gesture, a look of pride. But that look never came. Today, when I think about the woman I was, I see someone who gave everything, even what she didn't have. And maybe that was my mistake, giving so much without leaving anything for myself. Many mothers do this. We nullify ourselves, erase ourselves, give ourselves completely. And when our child finally has everything they ever wanted, they don't see the price we paid. If you've ever felt this way, forgotten, underestimated, but still full of love, comment here. I too have nullified myself for love. Because this story isn't just mine. It's the story of many women who have experienced the same struggle. I don't regret what I did. Every sacrifice shaped the woman I am. I faced life head-on, with faith, courage, tears, and dignity. But back then, I didn't yet know that a mother's greatest test isn't raising her child. It's continuing to love when they walk away. And so, without even realizing it, the distance between us began to grow. A distance measured not in kilometers, but in silence. She was everything I dreamed she'd be. Beautiful, intelligent, independent, and in a way, I felt like I'd won. But at the same time, there was a sadness I couldn't name. It was as if I'd built an entire house of love, and she'd decided to leave without looking back. And yet, I kept turning on the porch light every night, just so that if she ever wanted to come back, she'd know there was still a place for her here. I didn't know it, but life still had much to teach me, because true strength isn't in resistance, it's in forgiveness. And before I learned to forgive my daughter, I needed to learn to forgive myself for having believed that love and sacrifice always go hand in hand. But that part of the story comes later. There's still a lot you need to hear to understand everything that it happened. At first, I thought it was all in my head. The changes were so subtle they seemed too small to be painful. It started with the way she spoke to me. Before, her voice was sweet, natural, full of affection. But gradually, her tone changed. It became hurried, impatient, almost impersonal. Sometimes, it seemed like she wanted to cut the conversation short, like someone speaking out of obligation. And I, like every mother, tried not to notice. Pretending not to see was easier than accepting that love was becoming a habit. I remember the first time she called me Mom in that cold, emotionless tone. It wasn't the same tender mom as before. It was a hurried mom, said with a sigh, almost like a weight on her lips. That was the day I felt the first sign that something was different. I asked if everything was okay, and she said yes, without even looking me in the eye. And sometimes, what hurts isn't what they say, it's what they don't look at. She started, spending more time away. At first, it was for studies, work, friends. I understood. I thought it was beautiful to see her growing up, carving out her own space. But what began as pride turned into an awkward silence. I'd wait for her to arrive, prepare dinner, turn on the lights, and leave the food warm on the stove. But she'd arrive late, with a tired face and her cell phone in her hand. She'd give me a quick kiss on the forehead and say, "I'm tired, Mom," and go upstairs. I'd stay there, alone, staring at the still full plate on the table. Little by little, I realized she was becoming uncomfortable with my presence in certain places. When I picked her up from college, she'd ask me to wait far away, saying she didn't need to get out of the car. When someone she knew showed up, she'd change her tone of voice, as if trying to appear different. I pretended not to notice, but each time this happened, a piece of my heart would silently shatter. If you've ever been through this, if you've ever felt someone pull away for no reason, comment here. I felt that pain. I was never a woman of luxury. My clothes were simple. My hair wasn't always neat, but I always walked with dignity. But I realized that for her, this simplicity had become a nuisance. She began choosing the places I could go. She'd say, "Mom, let me handle it. You don't have to go with me." And I obeyed. Not out of weakness, but out of love. Sometimes, a mother's love is like this, swallowing her pride so as not to lose her child. One day, she asked me not to go to a company event. She said it would be better this way. Better for whom? Better why? I smiled, as I always did, and said it was fine. But that night, when I was alone, I cried silently. It wasn't the cry of someone who feels forgotten. It was the cry of someone who realizes that love is being exchanged for appearances, that respect is being replaced by shame. The things that once united us began to fade. The long conversations in the I kitchen, the late afternoon coffee, the Sundays filled with laughter. Everything became rushed. She barely listened to me, and when she did, it was to correct my speech, my accent, my old expressions, as if every word I said reminded her of a past she wanted to erase. That's when I realized her pride was no longer what it once was. She was no longer proud of me, but rather proud of having distanced herself from where she came from. I remember one day, we went to a restaurant. She took me because she wanted to celebrate a promotion. I wore my best outfit, one I saved for special occasions. It was simple, but clean and carefully pressed. When I arrived, I noticed she glanced at me quickly and sighed, as if disappointed. During dinner, she barely spoke. She was constantly on her phone, avoiding looking at me. At the end, when the waiter brought the bill, she said loudly so everyone could hear, "Let me pay." It was there, in that gesture, that I understood. She didn't want to share. She wanted to distance herself. Shame can't be explained. It's palpable in the air. It's a disguised absence of politeness, a care that's lost its soul. And I felt this more and more. When she brought friends over, she'd ask me not to worry about showing up. She'd say they were in a hurry. I obeyed. I'd go to my room, let them relax, and listen to their laughter from afar. A mother senses what's unsaid, and what I felt was that she didn't want them to see me. Over time, the distance became routine. She started visiting less, calling less, and responding to messages with few words. I, who had always been talkative, began to speak less too, not because I had nothing to say, but because I realized she didn't want to listen. I got used to the silence. I got used to the loneliness within my own home. And worse than loneliness is feeling like a nuisance in the life of someone you've given everything to. I tried to understand. I tried to convince myself it was a phase, that she needed her own space, that love isn't measured by presence, but the heart is stubborn, and mine insisted on remembering the girl who hugged me before bed, the child who cried when I left for work, the sweet voice that said, "Mommy, stay a little longer." Where did that girl go? Sometimes I'd look at old photos and see our sincere smiles, and I'd wonder if it was possible to go back in time. But time, when it decides to move on, doesn't come back for anyone. And I was left behind, trapped in memories, trying to understand where the distance began. The saddest thing is that a mother's pain is silent. We don't talk about it so as not to worry. We don't complain so as not to push her further away. We just feel it, and the feeling is heavy, it's exhausting. I'd look in the mirror and wonder if I'd done something wrong, if I'd given too much or too little. But the truth is, sometimes life creates a distance that doesn't come from guilt, but from pride. She started to feel ashamed of my stories. When I told her something about the past, she'd change the subject. She'd say I was stuck in yesterday, but yesterday was all I had. That's where I lived, in the memories, in the moments when we were still us. And hearing from her that the past didn't matter was like hearing that I didn't matter. One day, she introduced me to a friend and said, "This is my mother." That was it. No pride, no smile, nothing. I smiled on the outside, but inside I crumbled. I wanted her to say, "This is the woman who raised me, who taught me everything." But no, it was just my mother. A word said in a rush, as if it were just a detail in her story. And yet, I kept loving, because a mother never stops loving. We only learn to love in silence, and that's what I did. I kept loving in silence. I learned to keep love inside me, even when it no longer had room to exist outside. You know what's hardest? It's realizing that what was once pride has become discomfort, that what was once affection has become habit, that what was once love has become politeness. And that's why many mothers keep quiet, because speaking hurts, and keeping quiet sometimes hurts less. But I knew this silence had a limit, that one day he would scream. And when that scream finally came, I realized that what I thought was just distance was much deeper. It was shame disguised as independence. It was a wound I didn't yet know its depth. And that's where the story begins to change, because every pain has a point where it stops being invisible. And when that point arrived, nothing was the same before. I'll never forget that day. It's amazing how there are moments that seem simple on the outside, but change everything on the inside. I woke up early, as I always did. The sun hadn't even fully risen yet when I started making coffee. I was nervous, but happy. It was my daughter's first big company event, and she had told me, days before, that I could go. I don't know if she genuinely wanted to invite me, or if she was just being polite. But for me, it meant a lot. I wanted to be there. I wanted to see her recognized. I wanted to feel that somehow all my effort had been worth it. I spent the entire week choosing what to wear. I opened my closet and searched through the clothes I saved for special occasions. I chose a blue dress I had sewn myself years ago, using fabric I bought when I was still working as a housekeeper. I ironed it, dusted my shoes, and styled my hair with the greatest care. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a simple yet proud woman. I thought to myself, this is how a mother should present herself, with dignity. I didn't want to impress anyone. I just wanted them to look at me and say, "Mom, you did it." As I got ready, I remembered when she was little and would ask me to go to her school performances. I was always late because I'd rush home from work, my uniform still wrinkled and my hands smelling of cleaning products. She'd wait for me on stage with that smile that made it all worthwhile. Back then, just my look was enough to make her feel safe. But on that day of the event, time seemed to have erased all that. I was still the same mother, but the sparkle in her eyes was no longer the same. I caught the bus early. It took me almost 2 hours to get there. When I got off, I stood there for a few seconds, looking at the enormous building, full of glass windows and elegant people. I'd never been in a place like it. There was soft music, waiters serving, glasses, laughter all around. I entered slowly, trying not to look out of place. When I saw her, my heart raced. She was beautiful. She wore an elegant dress, her hair neatly tied back, and had that air of a successful woman I'd always dreamed she had. I approached her with the most sincere smile in the world, but what I received in return was a quick, embarrassed glance. She seemed surprised I was there. She simply said, "Mom, are you here?" as if she hadn't imagined I would actually show up. Before I could respond, she looked around. I noticed her eyes scanning my outfit, the worn shoes, the messy hair I wore. I saw the discomfort growing on her face. And then came the words I've never forgotten. In a low but firm voice, she whispered, "Mom, you didn't have to come dressed like that." For a moment, the noise of the hall faded. Everything inside me went silent. I felt the blood drain from my face. Shame came like a cold wave, running down my spine and locking my body. I couldn't respond. I just stared at her, trying to understand what I'd just heard. Dressed like that. I looked at myself, at my blue dress, at the shoes I'd cleaned so lovingly, at the simple necklace I'd inherited from my mother. All I saw in myself was love, but what she saw was shame. She tried to hide it, flashing a quick smile, tugging at her blazer to hide her embarrassment. She said she was busy and we'd talk later, and she walked away. She stood there, chatting with her colleagues, laughing, taking pictures, while I remained alone, in the middle of a room that seemed to be growing larger and larger. Humiliation is a kind of pain that doesn't scream. It suffocates. I stood still, unsure where to look. A few people around me noticed, and I caught looks of pity. The kind of look that says, she doesn't belong here, and maybe I really didn't. I didn't know what to do with my hands, or where to go. All I wanted was to disappear. But love is stubborn. I still stood there, trying to find a way to get closer to her again. I thought that maybe later she would calm down and come talk to me. I waited. I sat in one of the chairs in the back where no one would notice me. I watched from afar. She smiled, toasted, spoke confidently. I swelled with pride, and at the same time, I was torn apart, because every word she said reminded me of how far apart we were. The event ended, and she walked past me without even touching my arm. She said hurriedly, "I'll call you later, okay?" And she left. I stood there, teary-eyed and heavy-hearted. I waited for everyone to leave so I wouldn't have to meet pitying glances. When I finally did, the night wind hit me like a cruel reminder that I no longer belonged in her world. I walked to the bus stop with a tight chest. The noise of the city seemed to mock me. The lights, the cars, the laughter of couples on the sidewalks, everything reminded me how alone I was. I sat down, looked at my hands, and realized they were shaking. Hands that had once held hers so lovingly, now didn't know what to do. I clutched my bag tightly in my lap and tried to hold back the tears, but they came, discreetly, silently, as my pain always did. As the bus swayed through the streets, I wondered at what point I stopped being a source of pride and became a source of shame. Was it when she started achieving success? Or when I stopped fitting into the clothes and words of her world? I didn't know. I only knew that, for the first time, I felt ashamed of myself. And that's the worst part of humiliation. It makes us doubt our own worth. I arrived home late at night. The house was dark and cold. I left my coat on the chair and sat down on the bed, exhausted. My head was spinning, my heart ached. Her shame had become mine too. I spent hours staring at the ceiling, remembering everything I'd experienced to get there. The late nights at work, the exhaustion, the sacrifices, it all seemed so distant. And for the first time, I wondered if all that effort had been worth it. The next day, I woke up with puffy eyes. The mirror didn't lie. I saw a tired but still standing woman. My wounded pride didn't kill me, but it did leave me in pieces. I made coffee as usual, swept the house, and tried to stick to my routine. The body works even when the heart doesn't want to. And, as the coffee brewed, I decided I wouldn't call her. I'd let time speak for me. But time, instead of healing, opened the wound. She didn't call me. She didn't apologize. She pretended nothing had happened. And deep down, I knew that if I called, she'd answer with that same hurried tone, as if the conversation were an obligation. So, I kept quiet. I began to understand that a mother's love, when wounded, doesn't bleed on the outside. It bleeds on the inside, silently, every day. I learned to smile to hide it, to say it's okay even when nothing was. I learned to swallow my tears before they came out. If you're listening to me now and have ever experienced something similar, if you've ever been humiliated by someone you love, even though you didn't deserve it, comment here. I know what it's like, because there's some pain that only those who have experienced it understand. Pain that can't be explained. It's carried. The days passed, and with them, a part of me died. The love that once gave me strength began to weigh me down. I still loved her, of course, but that love was mixed with fear. Fear of trying to get closer and being rejected again. Fear of hearing again that I wasn't enough. And the worst part is, I was still proud of her. Even after everything, even after the humiliation, the cold gaze, the words that cut me. Because a mother's love doesn't depend on merit. It simply exists, even when it hurts. But no matter how hard I tried to hide it, the wound grew. And I knew that, sooner or later, it would bleed again. Because no one can pretend they don't feel it forever. And when the accumulated pain finally found a way out, nothing could stop it. But that part is still to come. After that day, she hardly called me anymore. What was once routine became silence. The daughter who once told me everything, her joys, her doubts, her plans, now seemed to live in another world, a world where I no longer existed. At first, I tried to justify it. I told myself it was work, it was fatigue, it was the rush of adult life. Mothers have this habit of finding excuses to avoid seeing the truth. But as the days passed, her absence became increasingly evident. The mornings became quieter, the nights longer, and the house seemed bigger, too empty for so much stored love. I still woke up early, making coffee, as if she would show up at any moment. Habit is something that sticks with us, and hope disguises itself well as routine. I looked at the set table, the smell of coffee wafting through the kitchen, and remembered when she would rush downstairs, hug me lightly, and leave smiling. Now that sound, her laughter, existed only in my memory. And when I missed her so much, I would pick up the phone and text her. "Hi, my daughter. How are you?" Sometimes she would reply hours later with short sentences. "I'm fine, Mom. Running around a lot." Other times, not even that. And I, with a heavy heart, tried to convince myself it wasn't personal, that it was just time, just life. But silence has a cruel way of speaking. It speaks slowly, every day, until we learn to listen to it. And what the silence told me was that it no longer wanted the same bond that once united us. That mother-daughter bond, so strong, so alive, seemed to unravel in the air, thread by thread. I felt like someone holding a rope that's slipping through their fingers, and no matter how hard they try to tighten it, They can't stop it from slipping away. One day she called me. It was quick, matter-of-fact, cold. She talked about work, about a trip she was taking, about plans I barely understood. I just listened, smiled, said, "That's great, my dear," and pretended that brief contact was enough. When she hung up, I stared at the phone for minutes. It was as if the device still carried the sound of her voice. I placed my hand on my chest and felt that emptiness that comes when love no longer finds a home. Over time, the calls stopped altogether. The messages, too. I tried sending old photos, memories from when she was a child, writing, "Look how beautiful you were," but I got no response. And even without a response, I kept going. Because a mother's love isn't measured by return, it's measured by persistence. When she moved to another city, I heard from others. A neighbor told me, not maliciously, just as a comment. I smiled and pretended I already knew. I said I was happy for her, that I was rooting for her, but inside I was broken. The idea of learning about my daughter's life from strangers was a pain I never imagined I would feel. In the first few months, I made every effort to call, text, and schedule a visit, always with an excuse, just to hear your voice, just to see if you're okay, just to tell you I love you. She responded with empty promises. "I'll be back any day, Mom. I'm really busy right now, but I'll call you as soon as I can." That, "as soon as I can," became an abyss, a space with no bridge, no echo, no return. Loneliness has a sound all its own. It's the sound of the kettle on the stove with no one to serve it, the ticking of the clock that seems to take longer than it should, the creaking of the chair when you sit alone and remember when the table was full. I began to talk to the silence, like someone talking to an old acquaintance. I said out loud, "She's fine. God is watching over her." It was a way of convincing myself that there was still purpose in what I felt. People around me noticed. Some tried to console me. "She's young, Mom. She'll be back soon." Others judged. "You must have done something wrong." And those last ones hurt the most, because I knew that though I wasn't perfect, my love never failed. I might have erred in method, but never in intention. I still sent gifts on special occasions, a simple keepsake, a handwritten letter, a scarf I'd embroider at night, trying to imagine her smile. And when there was no response, I'd keep the proof of delivery, as if it were a testament to my love. I'd tell myself, she received it, even if she didn't reply. That was what I clung to. The nights were the worst. The silence in the house seemed to deepen after 10. I'd sit on the edge of the bed and stare at my phone, as if it would ring at any moment. Sometimes I'd dream about her, and when I woke up, I'd feel like she was still nearby, but the pillow beside me was always empty. One day, I summoned the courage and decided to visit her unannounced. I thought she would be happy. I took the bus, traveling for hours with a basket of food I'd lovingly prepared, the dishes she'd loved most as a child. I was nervous, but excited. I wanted to see my own little piece of the world. When I arrived, the building's lobby was beautiful and modern. The security guard looked at me suspiciously. He asked if I'd been expected. I said, "I'm her mother." He called to confirm. And on the other end, I heard her voice, cold and distant, saying, "Tell her I'm busy." The security guard hung up and looked at me with pity. He said she couldn't see me. I forced a smile, thanked her, and sat on a nearby bench. I opened the basket, looked at the food, and tasted defeat. The wind blew hard, and for a moment I felt small, an invisible mother, a heart beating for someone who wouldn't listen. I rode the same bus home, clutching the still full basket. Every curve in the road seemed like a reminder of the distance between us. And when I arrived, the first thing I did was put the food on the table and look at it, as if expecting my daughter to suddenly walk through the door. But she didn't. I know there are people listening to me now who understand exactly what I'm saying. People who gave everything for love and received silence in return. If you've ever experienced this, comment here. I waited too. Because waiting is what we do when our hearts still believe, even without reason. The days turned into months, and the months into years. I saw photos of her on social media, with friends, traveling, smiling, and I was happy. Yes, I was happy. Because a mother's love doesn't envy her child's happiness, even when it isn't part of her own. But, along with the joy came emptiness, the same emptiness of being happy for someone who no longer recognizes you. I started attending church more often. It was the only place where I felt I still had a voice. There, people would call me by name and ask how I was, and I would say, "I'm fine, thank God," even when I wasn't. I prayed every night, asking only one thing: Lord, take care of her, wherever she is, and if it's your will, remind her of me. Time passed, but I never stopped believing that one day she would return. Faith is a wounded mother's last refuge. It's what keeps us standing when everything around us wants to bring us down. I learned to transform absence into prayer. With every unanswered message, a prayer. With every silence, a Father, give me strength. I began to age, and the mirror became cruel. The wrinkles deepened, the gray hairs multiplied. But what ages most is not time, it's longing. And my longing had a name, a face, and a voice. It was her, the daughter I raised, the woman who learned to live without me. Even so, I never stopped making coffee, never stopped setting the table, never stopped looking at the door with hope. Hope, no matter how tired, never dies. It hides within faith, waiting for the right day to blossom again. And it was just when I thought I'd learned to live with silence that something unexpected happened. A small, almost invisible sign, but strong enough to rekindle something inside me. But that's something you'll understand in the next chapter of this story. Because sometimes the silence that separates is also the same silence that prepares. I wasn't looking for anything. It was an ordinary day, one of those days when longing weighs more heavily than the body. The rain fell outside, fine and steady, and the sound of the drops hitting the roof seemed to speak to me. I decided to tidy up the closet, perhaps to distract my mind, perhaps to occupy my hands, which no longer knew what to do with so much absence. I began to take out old boxes, clothes that no longer fit, objects stored away for years, and it was there, among forgotten memories, that I found a cardboard box. It was small, lined with floral paper, and had her name written in a handwriting I would recognize even with my eyes closed. For a moment, my heart raced. That handwriting was hers, my daughter. I touched the lid carefully, as if holding a secret. Inside were some photos, childhood notes, drawings she'd made for me when I was a little girl. Each piece of paper was a fragment of the time life had taken, but in the middle of it all was a yellowed, sealed envelope with the name Clara written on the front. I'd never seen that envelope before. My hands were shaking. It wasn't curiosity, it was a premonition. I knew, deep down, that there was something in it I needed, but perhaps didn't want to read. I opened it slowly, as if afraid of awakening an old wound. I took out the folded letter, the paper already creased with age, and began to read. The first lines were gentle, almost innocent, but as the words gained weight, something inside me began to break. Dear Clara, sometimes I feel ashamed of my mother, not because she's bad, but because she's different. She speaks plainly, wears clothes that draw attention for the wrong reasons, and doesn't seem to understand the world I live in. I know it's wrong to feel this way, but I can't help it. It felt like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. The words felt sharp, as if each letter were a blade. I kept reading, even with tears in my eyes, like someone who needs to see through to the end what they don't want to believe. Sometimes when she shows up at work, I feel embarrassed. People stare at her, and I don't know what to do. I wish she were like other mothers, that she'd studied, that she knew how to talk like them. I know she gave me everything she could, but sometimes it feels like that's not enough to fit into this world. That sentence pierced me. It seems like it's not enough. I clutched the paper tightly, trying to hold back the tears. How many times had I thought love was enough? How many times had I believed that giving my best would be enough to be respected? In that moment, I realized that the deepest pain isn't rejection from others. It's discovering that shame resides within the one you loved most. I kept reading, even though my voice was breaking, even though my heart was beating so hard I thought I could hear it. I love my mother, but sometimes I feel angry at being dependent on her, angry at knowing I'll never have the life I want if I continue to be trapped in her image. I know it's cruel, but that's how I feel. I want a different future, and for that, I need to walk away. Her words were like knives, but at the same time, I saw in them a confession. She wasn't cruel, she was human. She was a daughter trying to understand her own pain, her own conflict between love and shame, between gratitude and ambition. And, even though it hurt, I understood. For the first time, I truly understood. She didn't hate me. She just couldn't deal with the difference between us. The world taught my daughter to be ashamed of everything simple, of everything that doesn't shine. And I, with my pure love and my hard life, became a mirror she didn't want to look at. I continued reading until the end, even when tears were already wetting the paper. One day, maybe, I'll understand how much she did for me. Maybe, when I have a daughter, I'll understand what it's like to love someone so much that you erase yourself. But right now, I just want to move on. I need to find who I am, away from her. When I finished, I stood still for a long time. The silence in the house felt heavier than ever. The letter trembled in my hands, and I felt torn between pain and understanding. It was as if each line had ripped away a piece of me, but at the same time revealed something I'd never seen. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around. Everything there held her presence. The photos on the wall, the picture frame with the childlike smile, the quilt I'd sewn myself. Everything. And suddenly, it all seemed to scream the same thing. I loved her too much, and she didn't know what to do with that love. I tried to remember the day that letter was written. Maybe it was around the time she started to pull away. Maybe it was a letter never sent, a pent-up outburst. But what mattered was that, on that piece of paper, were the answers I'd been searching for so long. And, as much as it hurt, part of me felt relief. That's how pain is. When it's named, it loses some of its power to destroy us. I cried. I cried for myself, for her, for everything that got in the way. I cried for the woman I was, who fought so hard to give her daughter dignity and ended up becoming a reminder of what she wanted to forget. And I cried for her, for letting herself be ashamed of her own story. The tears came without warning, and I let them. I didn't fight them. Because there are times when crying is the only way to express what the heart can no longer hold. I looked at the letter and for the first time spoke to her as if she were there. My daughter, I forgive you. Even without you asking, I forgive you. I didn't say it out of grandeur, but out of love. A mother's love isn't blind. It sees everything and still chooses to stay. And in that moment, even though I was broken, I chose to keep loving. I carefully put the letter back in the box. But something inside me had changed. The wound still hurt, but it wasn't just pain anymore. It was a bitter realization, a truth I needed to face. She was ashamed of me because the world taught her that what is simple is worthless. And maybe the mistake was never hers alone. I spent the rest of the afternoon sitting, thinking about everything that letter revealed. I thought about how much we mothers sacrifice in silence, believing that love will protect us from oblivion. But the world is noisy, and silent love sometimes gets lost in the noise. When night fell, I lit a candle. The light flickered on the table, reflecting off the dried tears on my face. And for the first time in a long time, I spoke to God, not to ask, but to understand. Lord, show me what this pain wants to teach me. The wind blew through the window, light, almost like a hug, and I felt something different. A calm I hadn't known still existed within me. Maybe it was his presence. Maybe it was just the weight lifting from my chest. But in that moment, I understood that behind her shame lay fear. And fear, I know well. I didn't throw the letter away. I couldn't. It was harsh, cruel in places, but it was also sincere. And somehow it was the only way my daughter had found to express her feelings. The truth can hurt, but silence kills. And that letter gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever. The truth. I put the envelope back in the box and put it in my dresser drawer. But its contents remained etched in me, as if the words had become a tattoo on my heart. Sometimes pain is just that, a tattoo we don't choose, but which teaches us more than any joy. And as the candle burned slowly, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. What would come next, I didn't yet know. I only knew that after that letter, nothing would ever be the same. Because when we see the truth, love changes shape. It doesn't disappear. It matures. But what happened after that discovery? You'll understand that in the next part. Because love, when hurt, can still turn into treatment. After finding that letter, I spent sleepless nights. Her words echoed within me, as if they were engraved on the walls of the house. I read and reread them mentally, trying to understand where I had lost myself. The pain came not only from what was written, but from what wasn't. The silence, the distance, the love that had become a memory. There was a hole in me that no explanation could fill. I felt empty, as if everything I was had been ripped away by those words. For days, I walked around the house like a ghost, doing the same things as always, but without really being there. My body moved, but my spirit was tired. Until one of those sleepless nights, the weight became unbearable. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at the box where I'd kept the letter, and for the first time, I truly spoke to God. It wasn't a rehearsed prayer, nor a pretty request. It was a heartfelt outburst, heartbreaking cry. I said, "Lord, I don't want to hate. I just want to understand. Help me forgive before this pain consumes me." And it was there, amidst tears and sobs, that something began to shift inside me. Faith is a curious thing. Sometimes it doesn't come with force, but with gentleness. It doesn't shout, it doesn't push, it just approaches slowly and settles in. As I cried, I felt a strange peace, a silence unlike the silence of pain. It was as if someone had sat beside me saying, "Nothing, just keeping me company." I knew it was Him. God doesn't need to speak to be understood. He makes Himself present in the calm that comes after the storm. In the following days, I began to wake up a little lighter, not because the wound had healed, but because I stopped fighting it. I understood that pain can also be a teacher, that suffering, when accepted with humility, teaches more than any victory. I started waking up earlier, opening the window and letting the sun in. I needed light, even though my heart was still dark. I started talking to God more, not to ask Him to change my daughter, but to change the way I saw her. I prayed, "Lord, help me see her through your eyes, not my own." And little by little, He showed me what I hadn't yet seen. My daughter didn't reject me out of cruelty, but out of immaturity. The world taught her to distance herself from everything that reminded her of pain, and I was a living reminder of her pain, of her difficult childhood, her poverty, her limitations. When we love someone too much, we sometimes forget that the other person is also trying to learn to love. And that's what God made me understand. She didn't yet know how to love the way I did. And deep down, all she was doing was trying to be accepted in a world that doesn't accept those who come from below. One day during worship, the pastor said something that stuck with me. God doesn't erase the past, He transforms it into testimony. At that moment, I understood the purpose of my pain. The wound that bled me wasn't punishment. It was a path. I needed to cross it to reach something greater, forgiveness. I remember kneeling on the cold living room floor, alone, and saying, "Lord, I place my daughter in your hands. I can no longer carry her weight and my own. Teach me to love without hurting myself." It was the most sincere prayer I've ever prayed. And there, in the midst of my tears, I felt a strength lifting me up. It wasn't the strength of my body, it was the strength of my soul. From that day on, I began to look at my story with different eyes. I realized that love isn't just what we give, but also what we choose to let go. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about deciding that the pain will no longer define who you are. I still missed her every day, but the longing was no longer an open wound. It was a memory with purpose. I started keeping a diary, not for her, but for myself. I wrote everything I felt, every memory, every thought. Sometimes I wrote as if I were talking to God, other times as if it were a letter to my own soul. It was my way of not letting my heart harden. One morning, as I was writing, a sentence came to my mind so clearly it sounded like a voice. "The shame she feels is a reflection of the fear she carries." I stopped writing and stared at the paper. It made sense. She was ashamed of me because she still didn't feel secure in who she was. It was as if, to belong to the world she chose, she needed to deny the world she came from. And it was in that moment that forgiveness was born. Not from a desire, but from a revelation. Forgiving isn't justifying a mistake. It's understanding the other person's limits. And I understood hers. I began praying for her every night, not asking for her to return, but asking God to keep her, to open her eyes, to remind her of the love I planted in her, even if it took time to blossom. I said, Lord, watch over my daughter where I can't be. Bless every step, even the ones that take her far away. And it was strange. The more I prayed for her, the less it hurt. It was as if prayer washed my soul, removing the salt from my tears and leaving only the sweetness of faith. Many people ask me how it's possible to forgive something like this, how it's possible not to feel anger, not to hold a grudge, and I always answer the same. When we surrender our pain to God, He gives us back whole. Forgiveness isn't weakness, it's the strongest form of freedom there is. Those who don't forgive carry the other person on their shoulders forever, and I had already carried enough weight. One day I dreamed about her. In the dream, she was a child again, running through the rooms of the house, calling me to play. I woke up crying, but with a light heart. It was that day I realized I had found peace, not because she had returned, but because I had returned to myself. I started taking care of myself, taking care of my house, my plants, my body, my soul. I learned to cook for myself without feeling guilty. I learned to laugh alone, to listen to music, to dance in the living room when no one was watching. I discovered that there is beauty even in solitude, when it is lived with purpose. Faith gave me back what pain tried to take away, my dignity. Faith taught me that there is no abandonment for those who believe, because God never abandons. He simply remains silent to teach us to listen to what our hearts cry out for. If you're listening to me now and feel a similar pain, if someone you love has hurt you without realizing it, if silence has become your companion, comment here. I place it in God's hands, because when we let go, the burden changes hands, and what seemed impossible to bear becomes light. I began to see my daughter differently, no longer as the girl who hurt me, but as the woman who was still learning. And in a way, I understood that my mission wasn't to make her love me back, but to love her enough that one day she would feel safe enough to come back. The house was still the same. Silence still lived there, but its meaning had changed. Before, silence was pain. Now, it was prayer. Every corner of the house held a memory, but also a promise. The promise that nothing is in vain when lived with love. One day, I went out into the backyard and saw a flower growing among the rocks. It was small, delicate, but it was there, alive, insisting on growing in the midst of the impossible. I looked at that flower and thought, this is how God works with us. He makes beauty blossom even from the cracked ground. And it was there, in that backyard, with the sun beating down weakly and the wind light, that I realized my wound wasn't a wound anymore. It was a scar, and a scar is proof that the pain has passed, but the story remains. Since then, I've been more grateful than I've asked, thankful for what I had, for what I lost, for what I learned, because everything, even the pain, brought me here. And although my heart still misses her, there is no longer any anger, only faith, and a living faith that sustains me and reminds me every day that nothing is lost in God's hands. But what happened after that surrender, after life decided to test me again, is something that changed everything. And that's what you'll hear about next. Because when forgiveness finds its right time, even what seemed dead can blossom again. Time passed, not in the light way we dream, but in the way life demands, silently, leaving marks on every memory, every gesture, every wrinkle the mirror insisted on showing me. I learned to live with absence like someone learning to live with a scar. It doesn't disappear, but it stops hurting so much. The days went by peacefully, but there was always a corner of my heart that still waited. Even without admitting it, even after having forgiven, I waited. Because a mother's love is stubborn. It doesn't give up, even when time tells me it's too late. The years changed everything around me. The city grew, the neighbors moved, the house became quieter. I grew older, my steps became slower, my body more tired, but my heart still beat strong when I heard a phone ring, a car pull up in front of the gate, or someone calling my name. Deep down, I always believed that one day she would return, and if she didn't, that was okay. I had already given her into God's hands. But He knows the hidden desires, those that the mouth doesn't confess, but the heart cries out silently. It was an ordinary afternoon, like so many others. I was in the backyard, tending to the plants. The soil between my fingers felt good, reminding me that life always finds a way to blossom, even after storms. The sky was cloudy, the wind carried the scent of rain, and it was between prunings that I heard them. The sound of footsteps approaching through the gate, hesitant, light, almost embarrassed steps. I thought it was the mailman or a neighbor, but when I looked up, time stood still. It was her. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. Her face was different, more mature, more serene, but still with that same look I carried in my memory. Only this time, that look didn't avoid me. It sought me out. Our eyes met, and I swear the whole world disappeared. There was no wind, no sound, no nothing. Just silence filled with everything we hadn't said for so many years. She stood outside, not daring to go in. I remained motionless, hoe in hand, trying to control my heart that felt like it was about to leap out of my chest. It was she who broke the silence. Her voice was shaky, almost childish, and one sentence was enough to make me crumble inside. "Mom, can I come in?" I felt tears burn in my eyes before I could even answer. I made a simple gesture, opening the gate. She took a few steps inside, looking around, as if stepping into sacred and familiar territory at the same time. And perhaps she was. The house was still the same, the yard the same, the smell the same. Only the time had changed. When she stopped in front of me, she fell silent again. I saw in her eyes something I'd dreamed of seeing for years. Regret. Not the heavy, guilt-ridden kind, but the pure regret that comes with longing. I said nothing. I just waited. And suddenly, she began to cry. A cry that came from the depths of her soul. A cry that carried years of silence, pride, fear, and distance. "Mom, forgive me." Those were the words. Simple, sincere, necessary. I could have said so many things. I could have remembered the pain, the humiliation, the nights of waiting. But when love is true, it needs no explanation. I stepped forward and hugged her. A long, tight hug, full of everything that had been bottled up inside us. I felt her body tremble, felt her face press against my shoulder, and felt her tears mix with mine. There were so many years of silence, and it only took a few seconds for everything to fall apart. Time teaches, but love heals. And in that embrace, I understood that time hadn't taken everything. It had paved the way for this reunion. She spoke between sobs. "Mom, I was wrong. I was ashamed. I wanted to be someone I wasn't. I thought that to be accepted, I needed to distance myself from everything that reminded me of who I was. But the more I tried to fit in, the emptier I felt. I wanted to forget you to feel strong, but I ended up losing myself." Each word she spoke was a patch on a heart I thought would never mend. I listened to her in silence. I didn't interrupt. I didn't judge. I knew her outburst was also a plea for deliverance. When she finished, I held her hands and said, "Daughter, the love I feel for you has never required perfection, and the forgiveness you seek, God already taught me to give you before you even asked." She cried even harder, and I hugged her again. It was as if two weary souls had finally found each other on the same wavelength. We entered the house. The smell of coffee was still in the air, as if time had waited for this moment. I poured 2 cups. She looked around, smiling through her tears, and said, "Everything's the same, Mom." And I replied, "Yes, my daughter, only time has passed." We sat at the table as we used to. I observed her face, now grown, with the marks that time had also left. I realized that, despite everything, she was still my little girl, and I was still the mother who loved her, even after everything. She began to tell me about her life, about her work, about the pain she faced, the losses, the disappointments. And in the middle of the conversation, she confessed, "It was after I had my daughter that I understood everything. I understood how much you loved me, how much you gave of yourself, and I felt so small, Mother, so regretful." I listened calmly, letting her speak without interrupting. It was her time to understand, her time to reap what only life teaches. And strange as it may seem, I felt gratitude that she finally understood that love isn't measured by status, appearance, or what the world approves of. True love is the kind that endures, even when everything falls apart. She showed me photos of her granddaughter, my granddaughter, a sweet little face, a smile that reminded me of hers when she was little. I touched the photo with my fingers and felt the tears come again, but this time they were tears of hope. Life had taken so much from me, but now it was giving me back something I thought was lost: the continuity of love. As we talked, she held my hand and said, "Mom, I don't know if I deserve your forgiveness." I replied, "Daughter, forgiveness isn't about deserving, it's about loving. And a mother's love has no conditions, no limits, no end." The sun began to set, and golden light streamed through the window. It was as if the heavens themselves were blessing this reunion. She looked at me and said, "How can you be so calm, so at peace after everything?" I smiled and replied, "Because one day I found God. And it was He who taught me that anger binds, but forgiveness frees." She remained silent, just holding my hand, and I saw in her eyes what I had waited for so many years: recognition. Not recognition of what I had done, but of what I had been. And that was enough. We stayed like that for a while, unhurried, just feeling each other's presence, and I realized that the pain had done its job. It separated us to teach us the value of reunion. Because sometimes you have to lose yourself to find your way back. If you're listening to me now and feel like you need to forgive someone, or perhaps ask for forgiveness, comment here. Time teaches, because that's what it does. It teaches. Sometimes harshly, but always with purpose. Night fell slowly. She said she had to go, but promised to return. This time, I believed her. I knew her "I'll be back" was sincere. The farewell was different. There was no more fear, no more shame. There was love, a mature, healed, whole love. I stood in the doorway, watching her walk away, and the night wind carried the sound of the car's engine fading into the distance. I took a deep breath, looked up at the sky, and silently thanked God. The same God who had sustained me in pain was now restoring my joy. But I knew there was more. The reunion was just the beginning of a new phase, because when love returns, it brings with it everything that time couldn't erase. And that's how time taught me that love, when it's true, doesn't end. It just waits for the right moment to return, flourish. The days that followed our reunion were different. The house seemed to breathe again. The air was lighter. The silence no longer hurt, and even the sound of the wind in the windows seemed to have a different tone. I was no longer the same woman who waited with open doors and teary eyes. I was a woman who had learned. I learned to love without expecting, to forgive without demanding, and to understand that not every absence is a lack. Sometimes it's just life's way of teaching us the value of presence. I looked back and saw my entire story as if it were an open book. Every chapter, even the most painful, made sense. The pain that broke me was the same that shaped me. The loneliness that accompanied me for so many years was the same that led me to find God. And forgiveness, the one that seemed impossible, was what set me free. Because forgiving isn't forgetting, it's freeing the heart to move forward in peace. And that's what I want you to understand. 2. Peace doesn't come when everything goes back to the way it was before. Peace comes when we learn to leave what was where it belongs and move forward with a light heart. True love doesn't seek recognition, it seeks purpose. Forgiveness doesn't erase what happened, but transforms what seemed like an end into a new beginning. For a long time, I believed that to love was to nullify myself, that being a mother meant sacrificing myself until only a piece of me remained. But time has taught me that love and suffering are not synonymous. Mature love doesn't require you to erase yourself. It invites you to be whole. And it is this wholeness that teaches, that heals, that transforms. When I look at my daughter today, I no longer see the girl who hurt me. I see the woman that time shaped, the daughter that life gave me back, more mature, more human, more real. And when she holds my hand, I feel that love has won. Not the love that shouts, that demands, but the love that understands, that accepts, that remains even when all seems lost. You know, sometimes people think wisdom comes with age, but it doesn't come with time. It comes with what we do with it. I could have become bitter, closed off, and suspicious. I had every reason in the world to do so, but I chose not to let pain define me. I chose to be light, even when everything around me was dark. And it was this choice that saved me. Faith taught me that every tear has a purpose, that nothing happens without a reason, even when the reason seems invisible. And when forgiveness finally blossomed within me, I realized that the greatest victory wasn't getting my daughter back, it was getting myself back. Because the love we give to others is beautiful, but the love we learn to give to ourselves is sacred. Today, I understand that forgiveness is a kind of new beginning. It doesn't change the past, but it does change the weight it holds over us. And when the heart is free, everything changes. Food tastes different, sleep comes more peacefully, and even the silence of the house feels like prayer. I often look back and see how far I've come. The woman I was cried every night. The woman I am now is grateful for every tear. Because it was there in pain that God shaped me. It was there that He showed me that faith is the only ground that doesn't sink. And if you're listening to me now and carry in your chest a pain that seems incurable or a resentment that holds you captive, remember what I'm about to tell you. Forgiveness isn't a gift you give to the person who hurt you. It's a gift you give to yourself. It's the key that unlocks the prison door you've unwittingly placed yourself in. Comment here. I choose to forgive. Write this not for me, but for yourself. Writing is the first step to freeing your heart. It took me years to understand that a mother's love is the purest reflection of God's love, a love that gives without expectation, that protects without demands, that forgives without conditions. But I also learned that to truly love, you must first love yourself, because a wounded heart that doesn't heal ends up bleeding on those who are not to blame. Many women write to me saying they're living similar stories to mine, mothers who gave so much of themselves, who were forgotten, humiliated, and left aside. And I always say the same thing. There's no pain God doesn't see, no tear He ignores. Sometimes He allows us to go through dark valleys not to punish us, but to transform us into light for others. Today, when I speak to my daughter, I realize that words carry a different weight. It's no longer the mother who speaks to teach, it's the woman who speaks to share wisdom. I no longer expect her to understand me completely. I just want her to feel that, despite everything, she always had a safe place to return to. Because that's what a mother's love does. It endures, even when all that's left is faith. Faith has brought me this far, and it's what keeps me going. I've learned that forgiveness isn't a moment, it's a process. Sometimes you forgive, and it still hurts. But each time the pain returns, you remember that you've already chosen to forgive, and that's enough. The heart learns slowly, but it learns. I learned to look at my story without shame. Everything I experienced, every humiliation, every tear, every silence, was the foundation of the woman I became. I am made of scars, and I am proud of each one. Because scars are proof of survival, the seal of someone who fell but got back up. And I want you, who are listening to me now, to know that no matter how big the wound you carry, it too will become a scar. And when it does, it will tell a story of overcoming, not of pain. Today, when I look to the sky, I give thanks. I give thanks for the love that remains, for the daughter who returned, and especially for the woman who was reborn within me. I am no longer the same. I am calmer, more confident, more aware. I learned that peace is not the absence of pain. It is the presence of God. And this is the greatest lesson life has taught me. The love that teaches is the love that understands. It understands the other's time. It understands limitations. It understands silence. The love that teaches is the one that doesn't give up, but it also doesn't lose itself. It waits, but it doesn't fade. It suffers, but it doesn't harden. And if you, like me, have ever had to learn to love in the midst of pain, write here in the comments. Love taught me. Because in the end, that's what unites us, the lessons that love leaves. I don't know what the future holds, but I know my heart is at peace. And when the heart is at peace, nothing scares me anymore. Time may pass, people may change, but what is true remains. And that's how I learned that love is a never-ending school. Every day, God gives us a new lesson, sometimes sweet, sometimes bitter, but always necessary. Now when I close my eyes, I no longer see the past as a wound, but as a path that has brought me here, ready to teach what love has taught me, that to forgive is to free, and to love is to heal. But there was still something I needed to say. One final truth that time had revealed to me, something that wasn't just about me, but about all the women who've loved too much, suffered too much, and still stood tall. And that's what you're going to hear about next, because sometimes the love that heals is also the love that dismisses. And as the song ends and silence fills the space again, I want to ask you something. Write a simple but powerful sentence in the comments. Love taught me. Also write where you're listening to me from. Your city, your state, your country. I want to know how far this story has come. I want to feel the presence of each heart that has walked with me this far. The stories I tell here in the Matriarch Secret Sare, not just about pain, they are about soul, faith, and rebirth. And the video now appearing on the screen is another. One of these secrets, a new teaching that will touch your heart in a different way, but with the same truth. Watch, because every story has a lesson, and every lesson has the power to heal what we don't yet understand. See you there.